Welcome to Arrested DevOps episode 36, Dr. BOFH, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the DevOps. I'm your co-host, Matt Stratton, at Matt Stratton on Twitter.
And I'm your co-host, Bridget Krumhout, at Bridget Krumhout on Twitter.
So Trevor's not joining us tonight because he's camping in the rain, so sucks to be him. But it doesn't suck to be 10th Magnitude, who's one of our sponsors. And they're a cloud services company that figures if you're listening to this podcast, you must be pretty cool and probably aren't camping in the rain with Trevor. You can find out about joining their cloud services team with Trevor at arresteddevops.com/10th Magnitude.
This episode is also sponsored by PagerDuty. PagerDuty eliminates the noise, chaos, and manual processes across the entire incident lifecycle to decrease resolution time. PagerDuty is trusted by companies like Etsy, Nike, and GitHub. To sign up for a free 14-day trial, visit arresteddevops.com/PagerDuty.
This podcast is also brought to you by Loggly. Loggly is an agent-free logging solution that can save your site and your sanity. Whether you're troubleshooting site issues or monitoring external services, Loggly allows you to easily discover root causes for specific errors while managing and centralizing your logs. Get started with all features included for free at arresteddevops.com/Loggly. And if you're listening or watching this live, please feel free to share your questions and comments on Twitter at ArrestedDevOps or on IRC on freenode.org, channel #ArrestedDevOps.
All right, so tonight we're talking to some reformed BOFHs, aka Bastard Operators from Hell, about how our experiences have changed over time in the industry. Our first guest is friend of the podcast, Chris Reed. How's it going, Chris?
Hey guys, good to be back.
So we also have Kevin Hubbard joining us for the first time. So welcome, Kevin. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Kevin Hubbard here. I'm currently the DevOps engineer for B-Cycle at Trek Bicycle Corporation. Have about 15 years as a former sysadmin.
All right. And also joining us is Ivo Van Dorn. Please tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Bridget. So my name is Ivo Van Dorn, and I'm also a reformed Bastard Operator from Hell. Previously worked at Classmates.com and McGraw-Hill Corporation, where I definitely practice those beliefs.
So great. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So I think for starters, I know we're obviously all familiar with Simon, aka the Bastard Operator from Hell. But first of all, listeners, if you're not, you can go to arresteddevops.com/BOFH, and there's a link to the BOFH archives. But really, kind of the history of it was, I believe it was, kind of some stories traded around on Usenet in the mid-'90s that were supposedly the diary of a computer operator named Simon, who lived with no purpose other than to terrorize the users of his systems and had a very antagonistic relationship. And to be honest, that was it really resonated for a lot of reasons. I feel like for most sysops and sysadmins at that time, makes me always think about there's a line in Clerks which is, "This job would be great if it wasn't for the fucking customers," and I kind of feel like
how great would this job? How many of us said how great would this job be if it weren't for all the users?
Exactly, like these people like touching my stuff and messing up my stuff. So I'd like to kind of hear some stories or experiences from the panel about, again, we've all lived in this type of relationship in our career. What was it like when we were starting out and you kind of had these barriers? Anyone can jump in.
I'll jump in. I don't know, to me it was sort of operating in a scarcity model. You had limited resources, and my background was more hardware-based, provisioning storage, supporting a hypervisor. And it seemed like anytime there was a new ask for a new application, I immediately went to, okay, how am I going to go back to ask for the capacity to run this? And I would get so frustrated, I boiled it down to, how are we going to support this? And that was like my standard line anytime someone brought up something new, which, I always wish that I could have been, or what I would tell people is I wish I had like a trophy to give you for a good idea, because I just can't get that off the ground with the resources that we have. it just kind of, I would say, was not a fun way to operate. But I thought that was the most realistic view.
Yeah, my introduction to it came from back when I was my last couple of years of high school, and back at university, I was the system administrator for at least when I was in high school for the school systems, and then in university as well, just helping out with adminning on the computer science side of things. And to me, initially, it was just seeing what damage ignorance of a system can do, how people trying to do something, how badly they could affect shared resources, and what the knock-on effect of that can do. And most of the time, it wasn't malicious; it was due to ignorance, but it kind of built up this mental attitude of all users are just out there to break things. We need to constrain them as much as possible, because when things break, you're the one that gets shouted at.
And also remember, at the time, the systems didn't have as many safeguards built into them. I mean, remember how terrible the locking was in the mail systems? Yeah, you had to restore people's mail, inboxes from backup all the time, but they weren't bad people or stupid, and that's why they tanked their mailbox. It was because the tools were not, actually all that helpful.
That's because you were using the new shiny Mbox. You should have just left emails as individual files as God intended.
Until the file system filled up.
Yeah, exactly. Or you run out of iNotes.
I remember years ago, I had a good friend of mine who's on the dev side of the house, and I would get emails or calls from him, and it was in different companies. We working at different companies, and he'd basically be asking me how he could get around the things the sysadmins put in his way. He'd be like, well, I really need to do this thing, and so how can I get around this thing? And I was like, dude, I can't do that. I can't sell out my... I'm like, I don't even know your sysadmins, but those are my brothers, man. I'm like, I'm not going to screw them over by telling you how, even though I totally could. And that to me like resonates to the way that I think a lot of us thought about it, which was and again, like to Chris's point and to Bridget's point, not necessarily malicious, but there was this belief that it was like just devs are stupid, right? Or whomever, and like whoever your users are, whether you're supporting an app dev team or if they're end users, if you're supporting back-end infrastructure stuff, all they're going to do is break things because they don't care, right? Like nobody cares about the systems like a sysadmin does because they're ours, right?
Now I keep seeing smiles from Evo, so tell us about your background.
Yeah.
Which of these camps were you in?
So I was definitely in the sysadmin camp, and our devs, while they didn't care, they were also incentivized not to care. So the place I came from, they had deadlines, and let's talk about software like methodologies or software development methodologies. It was very much waterfall, and they had a deadline on, say, a Thursday, because it was like every 3 or 4 weeks, and sometimes ended up being on a Thursday. And a developer who they got actually paid on, and this was the social network that never became like good, because they're still around. I don't want to like refer to them by name, but like this company incentivized their developers to ship code that was intentionally bad, and I've had some nightmare stories and some nightmare late night like trying to figure out, and one in particular that I can remember is we launched this new yearbook type app where someone could upload their photo, and the developer shipped code to the sysadmin team or the system engineering team, and it didn't include any logic for when an upload would fail. Now, that doesn't seem bad, except for that this also went on a brand new NetApp that was set up, and it had restrictive permissions on it because I'm a sysadmin and I care about locking down permissions to the operating user of that app, which is at that point was a resin app that was running as a resin user, which was under a JVM, and it did not have write permissions on certain directories on that photo, that new like NAS. So it could create directories if certain things happen in the right order, but if for some reason it didn't happen, the photo would say it was uploaded successfully to the user, and it would also put it in the database as like it would link to the photo that it was uploaded successfully where it was at, but there was no photo.
I think we had the same code at apartments.com because we had the exact same problem with our for rent by owner, where the same thing, where there was a photo upload capability, and then you would end up with all this junk in the database that would end up with like 404 images on the site because it would like generate the URL that pointed to no actual image file. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was one of my like bastard operator from hell moments, and it was just like fucking developers.
But you made a really good point. It's okay. We've made our peace with the explicit tag.
Yeah.
You made a really good point about misaligned incentives. I'm wondering if the rest of our panel wants to address what they've seen with incentives that may or may not have been diametrically opposed or at least not aligned very well, and how that made the sysadmins versus the rest of the organization or even users or devs or whatever behave.
So I can tell this is a fun story I like to tell about. So if we, and again we've smarter folks and I have said this before. I mentioned in the show notes that Tom Limoncelli talks about this, and Chris already corrected me in the green room that actually someone else said it first. But again, it's just this idea that in development, commonly you're incentivized to deliver features, and in ops you're incented to provide stability. And what provides stability is things not changing, right? Like changes make shit break. So I think back to a colleague of mine who was, and this wasn't all that long ago. This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, even, that this was true. And she was a tech ops director at a firm, and basically, literally, her bonus was tied to based on a percentage of uptime of the site. So this was downtime on that site was cash money out of her pocket. And do you think that this person would ever let anybody touch anything? Hell no. And could you blame her? Right? That's and
that sounds like a recipe for never upgrading for vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it was totally it ain't broke, don't you dare try to fix it.
No.
So
yeah, I guess along similar lines, my experience with developers, or that, maybe it was a small group that really had some sort of territorial, sort of mindset around the application. And I don't think the sort of viewpoint that users are losers is just for sysadmins. I think that developers often have the viewpoint that, users don't know what they're asking for. So I often found myself sort of siding with the users on okay, this is obviously a bug, this is not working the way it should, and just running up against a wall with developers, just they had stuff in their pipeline, typically, new features or a complete rewrite, and shit that was just broke was left to the sysadmin to either restart services or figure out some other way to sort of explain away in a very lengthy phone call of why it works this way. And that was kind of yeah.
Do the workaround, right? I mean, let's talk about the loveliness of ITIL, right? What's one of the things ITIL gave us? Literally the word workaround, right? That's like a thing in ITIL, is that there's a workaround, which means we're not going to fix it, but somebody's going to have to do some work. And I remember at apartments, and again, this could happen anywhere, so I'm not saying bad things about the company. It's more about maybe some of the developers that are still good friends of mine, but I can talk shit about them. We had a scenario where, so there was a memory leak in the web app, in this .NET web app, that basically required at least several times a day actually having to recycle the app pool. And this went on for weeks and weeks. And it was a matter of, well, it's no big deal, sysadmin will do it. And they're like, for real?
Right.
It's like, no, we can't. We're not going to try to troubleshoot this because we have to ship features. Never mind the fact that we are constantly, again, it's that common, things aren't being operationalized or being thought about in that way. And I think that's a big thing that caused that divide, right? Which was not, so you do end up with that, that feeling like nobody gets it, man, right? And I've worked with lots of sysadmins who again, have this personal attachment to their stuff. And I remember writing this is the thing. So let me tell you, this might be the way that my thinking has changed. So when I was a manager, I remember a review that I wrote for one of my sysadmins over and over again, who worked for me for years, and his review always said, so-and-so takes the uptime of our website personally. And I thought that was a grand compliment, right? And then if you think about it, it really, I mean, again, he was an awesome sysadmin, and if he ever is listening to the show, Barry, rock on, you were super great, that, and not a slam on him. But that's not actually a thing to drive, right? Because then you're talking about, like, again, even though it wasn't a monetary incentive, he had a personal investment in that kind of thing, so that's going to echo through how you approach allowing change to your systems. And I think it comes out subtly, too, right? Like, you sort of project this, like, cowboy developer thing on people just by virtue of because they're touching your stuff, whether they're cowboys or not.
And there's so many valuable things that you're saying there, Stratton, and I want to hear more from our panel about this too. Yeah. But I want to point out too that in reality, there's a lot of perception of, like, oh no, the whomever will touch our stuff and it'll go wrong. But, like, reality, anyone who touches anything, it can go wrong. Hey, AWS is having AWS-like things happen. It can go wrong. Totally bizarre interactions between, some sort of kernel bug or a misconfiguration in your VPC that leads to ARP cache problems. Not that it's oddly specific because it happened to us recently. Like, there's all sorts of things that can go wrong that are often not a specific person's action.
And the irony of it is the same sysadmins who will love to talk about, like, how developers are going to fuck up their shit, love to sit and tell war stories with each other about when they fucked shit up, right? Chris was on, we did a whole episode about this, right? So we're complete hypocrites.
Yeah, reality, we all fuck shit up.
Yeah. But with the memory leak one that Matt was talking about, it reminded me of kind of one of the first times where I actually started to see the value of educating users. And it was a web app, it was a big e-commerce.com, and it was, again, leaking. This time it was just leaking sockets. It was a Java web app, and this thing was just leaking sockets. And every 3 hours we had to restart the JVMs and just cycle them through the cluster one by one to keep uptime. And eventually I happened to be we just migrated from ClearCase to CVS, thankfully, and so I was happy to be rid of ClearCase. But I decided to go and dig through the code and see what this guy was doing. And basically he'd create sockets and just leave them there, and he'd never close them and he'd never clean them up, and that's why they were leaking. And so eventually I went over and spoke to the developer, and it's like, why are you not closing your sockets? And he's like, garbage collection handles that for me. And then the penny dropped. It's like, okay, so he thought he was right. He wasn't being malicious. He wasn't trying to be a pain. It was just he didn't know any better. And so this was also at the stage where I had a 6-foot pine pole that I carried around, which the developers titled the clue stick, because whenever I walked around with the clue stick, then me walking towards where the developers carried the clue stick, everyone was nervous. Everyone would look up. It's like, oh dear, who done it? And I reached the stage, but then I realized that we need to have these conversations. We need to be talking with the developers and saying, hey, do you realize that this thing you're doing is causing this massive impact for everyone else?
So basically a 6-foot-long pine stick of clue is not DevOps.
It is not DevOps.
Yeah,
it is one of the sections that is the DevOps.
So how is this
not DevOps compliant?
So how is this changed, though, right? So things are, well, first of all, that's going to be kind of my question is has it changed in your experience? I mean, Chris was going right to that, so I want to hear a little bit more about how do you look at, because we're all supposedly reformed BOFHs here. So how did you make that transition? How did you, did 12-step program? Did they put you into, Simon rehab in the desert or what?
So me, I at this stage I'd spent a good 3-4 years each side, either being a developer or being a sysadmin or being a network admin. And so, I would flip-flop between the two, because whilst being elbows deep in cables in a data center, I would miss writing code, and while waiting for my code compile, I'd miss kernel optimizations in the hardware. And so it was realizing that I could have these conversations with developers, and that I would actually, their reaction to me would be better if I went without the clue stick and had the conversations, and started speaking to them about, so do you realize that some feature in your code is doing X and Y? And as probably to a bigger extent, it really took off for me when I joined ThoughtWorks about 10 years ago, where the very first project I was on was with Jez Humble and Dan North, and that's the one that we kind of wrote the initial continuous integration pipeline paper that came out of, and eventually that's the project that Jez's book came out of, because then there was 8 of us sitting in a room and on this project, and our whole purpose was to get code written by 2 different development teams, get it out into production onto the client systems. And it was only through, we had the relationship with our developers, but we didn't have the relationships with the client sysadmins, and it was only through getting them involved in all the questions that I really really realized that it needs to go both ways. It's not just sysadmins telling developers, hey, do you realize your code is doing X, Y, and Z, but it's also, from being the developer's advocate, going to the sysadmin saying, hey, what's our network config look like? What's our hardware look like? What are our options around X, Y, and Z? And building up the relationship and being able to test when we found, again, one of the first deployments we did on that project was, one of our first prod deployments out to a cluster, everyone was writing state to local file system. But then as they didn't have sticky bits on the load balancers, so as they flipped over, it carried on. And so it's just this keep on going. Keep on trying.
I totally agree with Chris. To the newbie here, that it just seems like DevOps has, sort of formalized the relationship between sysadmins and developers. And I'm sure you guys have covered that before, but to me, being new to the role, it also just seems like a much more natural, sort of iterative process working closely with devs. I think a lot of what we're talking about is this sort of dichotomy of users, and sort of I've traded up, the end user with people that are actually, classically trained IT pros, and so the conversations that we're having now that the relationship is more formal, is just I don't know. To me, it just seems much more valuable. We're working side by side. We're sort of kicking ideas back and forth. So to me, it feels like there's less of the time spent. Are you asking, I have to do the math. Are you asking for what you think you're asking for? That was my sort of approach to users, end users. But now that my customer base has changed, and now my customers are devs, we kind of cut to the chase in a sense, and we really are starting to have a meaningful conversation around what's the best way forward, what's the smart decision, and we're working. I don't know, anything else I say is going to sound really sort of kumbaya and cheesy, but I think you guys catch my drift.
Hey, we're all about the kumbaya and cheesy here.
Nice.
I was actually going to just say, like, that back and forth collaboration I think is super valuable, and also, like Chris said, that it's not so much just Chris is the one dispensing wisdom from the mount, like bringing down stone tablets to hand to ignorant folk or whatever. I mean, that's not the way it works anymore, because of the kind of people that Kevin's talking about who we're collaborating with. I mean, like at Drama Fever, we had some horrible cache machine problems, and Art, one of our developers, is the one who put a lot of effort into solving a lot of them. And it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe that's something that in some organizations would have just been the, role of ops, but we actually have a pretty collaborative relationship, and we had a developer who had the skills and the ability and, like dug deep into a problem. It's like, I like having that kind of collaboration on a team.
So for me, sorry, Bridget, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, Bridget, have you ever seen handing down stone tablets on high work at all? I've never seen.
I don't know. What do you think, Evo?
I have not. But so one of my I'm gonna completely cut back to why I went to the anti-BOFH camp is they actually fired our PMO organization, and that made things a lot better. It's actually interesting that they were sort of like they existed. Except this is at my last job. They existed to sheerly like separate dev from ops, and we were going through a downturn, and they got rid of the project management team. I'm sorry, project managers out there. We all love you, but in this case, you didn't do a good thing. And the moment they got rid of them, they actually had to invite someone from system engineering into the development meetings, because it was in the past, it was someone from project management that would communicate the needs and the wants from development for the next release. But now it was actually someone from IT operations that sat in the room, and it became it immediately became more collaborative. And immediately we saw and foresaw things that were happening early on in development of a sprint, because we were actually using Agile development, but we had a PMO organization, so it was like a hybrid Agile development because it's not truly Agile. Anyways, we actually foresaw things coming down from development that we could actually support them early on, and we knew exactly what it would take to actually undertook that initiative. And at that point, I saw the light. Like I without reading anything about DevOps, or without then there was stuff about DevOps already published at that point, because DevOps is 5 years old today, right, Matt?
It's about 5.5 years old at this point.
Yeah. So like this is well into DevOps actually being a thing, and I actually remember reading about DevOps at Netflix, and I'm like, well, that's never going to apply to me because that's Netflix.
I think we've all had that. Like I've told the story before about the first time I heard Jez on DevOps Cafe talk about continuous delivery, and I'm literally driving down the Eisenhower Expressway yelling at my radio that would never work at apartments.com, and then he drops the HP LaserJet firmware story, and I'm like, oh, never mind. Yeah. So.
Right. So for me, it was getting rid of PMO actually allowed us to start collaborating with the team, and that turned into a lot of good things. I'll let someone else pick it up.
Yeah. No. That's.
No, that.
So how does this?
That makes sense in that even if you have project management as a focus in your organization, that doesn't replace the actual cross-functional cooperation.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think I can see, and Ivo, not to put words in your mouth, but see if I'm kind of unpacking what you said, is it wasn't so much that having a PMO in general was the problem, but a catalyst that forced the collaboration was removing them. So previously the PMO had fulfilled a certain role of communication when those people weren't there. Maybe the point wasn't to enhance all this awesome collaboration, but it was just like, well, someone can't take the requirements from the users and give them to the engineers thing, right? So it was like, I guess people have to talk to each other, and then you see dividends pay out of that, right? You didn't start coming to the meetings so that you could do the DevOps. You started coming to the meetings because you had to, and then there was a benefit that came out of it.
Absolutely. So there's this great example of where we had to do a data center migration. So my last employer, they were a managed services company, or they were paying a managed service company about $14,000 a month to host about 15 servers. I kid you not, 15 servers, and it cost them $14K a month. And it was like with this outfit in the New York area, and like I came in the first 6 months, I'm like, what? Why are we spending this much money when we have a staff of 6 in Seattle supporting 15 production servers that we could easily do? And so I came and I went to the VP of operations. I'm like, and technology. I'm like, hey, so we could easily do this for about a third of the cost if we did this on our own. Like, and they were anti-cloud, so I even proposed AWS at the time. I'm like, okay, so I got shut down on AWS, but they were totally open, and it was because of business stuff. So there's a bunch of accounts, and they couldn't do AWS because of accounting, whatever. So I proposed like something safe. It was like VMware, and it was about a third of the cost. They would have ROI in the entire thing in about 9 months because they were paying so much money for 15 servers. And so we started this project, and I actually reached out to the head developers at the time, like, so we're going to move everything over, and I got shut down by my PMO organization. On top of that, I actually got like spanked. Like, I hate using the word, but I actually got verbally assaulted by people because I approached the developer directly about like getting this done, which would have direct like savings to the business. On top of it, gave us the ability to deliver faster.
But that sounds like that sounds like you're describing an organization that's fairly dysfunctional, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, if they don't want you to save them money because instead they want you to preserve some power structure or some real or perceived internal organization.
Yeah. Yeah, so like I ignored it because I'm pretty stubborn, and Matt knows this. I'm pretty stubborn as I can be, and I just kept on going. I'm like, well, I saw the light. I'm like, I'm going to keep going. And I remember it was about 2 weeks before we had to cut over from this managed service organization to the new data center, and the developers were all on board. We had some minor issues, and they're minor issues in that. Like some of the IPs didn't translate because we were moving the static app from one place to another, and like there were some changes. The development organization was all on top of it, but the PMO organization wanted to put a block on it. Like they're like, no, we're going to delay by a month. I'm like, no, we know what the problems are. We've realized what the problems are. We have a plan forward. I was using a configuration management tool at the time that was different than what I currently work for. And we had identified the issues in that.
It's okay to say where you work, Evo.
Yeah, okay, great.
Evo's my boss at Chef, by the way.
Ah, shit.
He also loves it when I call him my boss.
Anyway, so
you thought you were going to get through this show without that coming up.
Anyway, so I was using Puppet, and we had everything written in Puppet, and it was like we were going to completely stand up the infrastructure with Puppet, and we knew exactly what was wrong, and we identified it, and we even fixed it within 6 hours. But the PMO organization, because we had a mistake that happened now 2 days ago, they wanted to delay the entire thing by a month, which would cost the organization another, because we put in our notice, they were going to charge us $20,000 to stay there. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Anyway, so we ended up moving forward. We overruled the PMO organization, but to this day, it's bad times.
Stay away from that.
Yeah.
So Kevin, tell us a little bit about the dev/ops cooperation, or whatever it is that you have where you work. Do you have project managers standing in the way of your ability to talk to each other?
No, we don't. But I mean, I don't know if it's an exact sort of similar situation, but we kind of have inherited the application we're working on from a vendor that was developed, according to a certain spec back in the day, and we've taken it on. And I hear stories. This was before my time at Trek, but the relationship before, we'd basically write some code, throw it over the wall, or rather, the vendor would write some code, throw it over the wall, and it either did or did not do what it was tasked to do. And oftentimes, it did not do what it was tasked to, but we just didn't have the group in place to sort of say that, hey, this is not what we basically paid for. It could be so much better. So since we've taken it in-house and created the DevOps side, I just feel like as we're looking through, plug for a sponsor, through Datadog, and seeing, that there's, definitely opportunities to make the application run more efficiently, that we're all looking at this together. There's less, sort of team division where it's, well, this is a, resource hardware issue versus, no, this code could definitely, be written better. I think we're all sort of focused on those things together. We're in a small room together, so maybe that's part of it. And we sort of work on our solution, throughout the day. We have a a test B-cycle kiosk in our office. It's like 5 feet from my chair. It's about 5 feet from everybody's chair. And the normal sort of process is it starts out working in the morning, but sometime around noon it's definitely broken, and hopefully we get it working again by 5 p.m. But we're all working on that. We're sort of working against instances in Azure on the server side, deploying manual fixes and DLLs to the application on the station itself. So for me, I don't know. I have like a little bit of a panacea. I love what I do. I love who I'm working with. I'm learning a ton. I think that was one of the worries. I know you guys covered what it means to be a new DevOps in a previous episode, but one of my big concern is I'm not going to.
Kevin, you can talk about it now too.
Sure. It was really sort of a leap outside of what I was comfortable with, and I knew that in the interview, and I've just found that there's just this level of excitement in not knowing, and a level of I got to figure it out, because no one, obviously people will help me, but I'm not one to sort of like punt. So I like to like dig in and figure things out, and it definitely seems like if I do get stuck, I have the people there that know the answer on the code side, or can help me with whatever I need for help with on the development side. So I guess maybe take it to some other place. The things I know that one of the questions we have on the agenda is what's changed for me. I think all the tools have definitely changed, but they haven't changed so drastically that I'm completely lost. I mean, I definitely, once I get in and see what okay, this is a little bit different than it was before. I guess I'm not in UCS management console. I'm now in portal management, or everything you guys are intimately aware of, has been just such an awesome shift for me, because I don't feel like I'm sort of in this camp that has to defend against all other attacks from other camps, or users that don't know what they're asking for, or financial sort of barriers to accomplish what we want to get done. I don't know if I answered your question, but I yapped for a bit there. It's just been, for me, it's been really cool. I think we're working on a product that's definitely has a long ways to come to mature, and I don't see that we have any sort of major blocking or need to go outside of our group to solve the problem. I think everybody that has the different knowledge or background to solve the problem is working on the problem at the same time.
That's
awesome.
Pretty great. That's awesome. All right, so that's a perspective of you're doing this stuff, lately or recently. Chris, I know I've seen you smile a couple of times there, because you've been doing this stuff for a while. You want to give us your perspective?
Yeah, a couple of things, just especially with the talk of PMO. That's pretty much one of the first things that we got rid of at DRW when I joined, was just the project managers getting in the way. We still have 2 project managers that we use. They are very, very valuable when it comes to doing things like data center migration, setting up new data centers, big bits of work where timelines are needed and bits and pieces and the rest. But they've got nothing to do with software deployment, software delivery, software management. They are really focused on data center infrastructure, circuits and lease lines and all the rest. Also, a lot of the talk I've spent today at GoTo Chicago. GoTo is kind of the current generation of one of my favorite lines of conferences, and I was going to save this for the pointers at the end. But one of my favorite talks today was a good friend of mine, James Lewis, talking about how he embraced Conway's law, and his talks initially primarily centered around the microservices oriented points of view, but everything that he talks about applies to what we're trying to do from the DevOps point of view. Conway's law, if anyone's not familiar with it, but Conway's law states, and he stated this in 1968, that organizations, basically organizations' software reflects the communication lines that happen within the organization. And so James points out that a lot of companies that are successful with microservices, what they do is they actually combine their systems. They reduce the overhead of communication between teams, and so you get these cross-functional teams that are focused on delivering a product. And so there's no PMO involved in there. Within the team, you have your developers, you have your infrastructure guys, you have your networks guys if needed. Any QAs and testers and all that kind of thing. There is a single team working together, and they have complete ownership of what's going on. But this also works outside the software industry. One of the great examples he uses is around the team at the Royal Free who cured the 3 Ebola patients that made it into the UK, where they've got exactly the same thing. There's a team of 33 that focuses on each patient, that focused on the Ebola patients when they came in. But of that 33, only 7 were clinicians. They had their own porters, they had their own facilities guys, they had their own finance guys that were all kind of dedicated on this team to, okay, this is a serious infectious disease that we need to kind of iterate around very, very quickly because, how are we going to cure this? How are we going to stop it from spreading? And these same principles that we're talking about within software are also principles that people are dealing with outside the techie realm. Some of the other bits and pieces that we have around kind of the age, the changing of the BOFH mentality for me is how I treat my PFYs. So the PFYs, for those not familiar with the BOFH, the PFY is the pimply faced youth. The first PFY or 2 that I had, the important lessons that I felt I needed to teach them was, defensive. How to preempt the evil things that the users would try and do. My current PFY, now is it's at least the one before, the one I had in London. He would often complain about the history lessons that I would give him. But often it's once the history lessons helped him understand how we get there. And so some of those history lessons would be hardware orientated or network protocol related. But some of the history lessons also how we got to the stage now where we need to talk to everyone involved in focusing and having everyone focused on the goal of where we're trying to get to. Rather than have this antagonistic approach, try and see it from the other person's angle and try and think about the problems that they're trying to solve and see how can we help us as a group, collective, move forward.
That's a really good point, Chris, because I know that a long time ago in the 90s, when I was learning by example and learning by, reading Alt System and Recovery, you remember Alt System and Recovery. You're smiling.
Oh yes, the memories.
But when that was the environment that was shaping my attitude, I had to actively work to change my attitude, to move past that, and to start thinking about things from the perspective of other people. And how can we all work together to try to meet the organization's goals more effectively? And like that, it does require like making a deliberate decision to shift, but I'm glad that you're taking that approach and teaching that to your PFYs these days, because hopefully then more people aren't going to start out in the BOFH mentality that we started out in.
Definitely.
So how can we do better? So I mean, we've been talking about how we used to be this way, we're better now. But what are some of the things when you kind of look at, and I would say only 3/5 of the people on this panel right now are actually practicing sysadmins or sysops or whatever right now. Evo and myself don't do that necessarily directly for a living, so it's a little easier for us to talk about, like, it's more hypothetical. But for those, Bridget and Kevin and Chris who are doing this work, how what do you want to do to get even better about this? Unless you're totally perfect now, and then you can.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, I definitely would like to become more familiar with just development standards and hey, pick up a language and start writing code. PowerShell right now is where I spend most of my time, and I'd like to take a stab at building something. Not that I haven't done that in the past, but it seems like now, in my off hours when I'm not working, I'm more likely to do that. So that's kind of my playbook here coming up. Just being able to like steer DevOps and make smart decisions on what tools we're using, and not to just take a little bit of from here, take a little bit from there, as far as the plethora of the tools that are out for um, whatever you name it. There's just a lot of focus on tools for DevOps. So I don't know. Again, there's I want to maintain this new flexibility I've found in DevOps, but I feel that there's some decision making that needs to be made on what tools we're using, what we're standardizing on, and how to keep that going forward. So, taking my page out of my old playbook, how are we going to support that? But yeah, finding a way to support that because it makes sense and it is in this sort of new realm of cohesion and working more closely with all different well, not all camps, because we don't have the typical infrastructure teams or email support groups in what I'm doing. So just taking this new sort of relationship between ops, being able to go to the cloud to spin up new instances, create more capacity for our applications, and yeah, just sort of being able to keep going down that successful path, which has been successful it's been about 10 months now, almost 11 months. But sort of keeping the agility, keeping my eye towards what's coming down the pike as far as new tools, how to use some of the different. My head's swimming. I spent the last week at MS Ignite, so.
So you have all sorts of ideas.
I know. Like I want to talk about Release Manager and how excited I am for that as a platform to build all these other, link in all these other cool tools that we're using, Octopus Deploy, Chef, Team City, to sort of use that as a sort of base platform to start building up some more in-depth release process and metrics on how frequently we're releasing. To me, I think it's important to show to the business leaders, how important this DevOps notion, or that's not just a notion, that there's some traction being made, having this sort of focus on constant development, constant deployment. I think at Trek it's kind of a neat organization because their products are built around that. They're constantly releasing new product and new bikes, apparel, what have you. So constant improvement is a thing at Trek, and I think DevOps fits that as well, and just being able to show that with some metrics. So yeah.
I think that's
really. I was going to say, Stratton, I bet you're probably thinking what I'm thinking, which is it's really exciting that Kevin just told us all this stuff, and this is from a Windows perspective. And I know that those of us who have been doing this for a while, like, we didn't think of Windows as a platform that you could even talk about, continuous delivery or configuration management on. But there's been so much progress in that area; it's amazing.
Yeah, it's I want to just kind of throw this in here a little bit, following up on some of the stuff Kevin was talking about, because initially this episode was supposed to be our Microsoft Ignite wrap-up episode, but that was a big fail for me, so we put this one together, and I'm actually really excited. This turned out pretty awesome, so I love that. But one of the couple observations that I had about Ignite that I do want to share, one was just the amount of interest that we had at the Chef booth, and that's not a patting ourselves on the back. That's not supposed to be like, oh yeah, because Chef is awesome, everybody wanted to talk to us. But compared to previous events, just how many folks that were at this basically what used to be tech ed, so this is the what Microsoft would call the IT pros, so the sysadmins of the Microsoft world, the admin, it's not mostly developers and stuff. How many came to us and maybe they didn't know what Chef did, but they understood, like when we said, oh, this is something that helps facilitate DevOps, they knew what that meant in kind of a very real way. And it was a lot more talking about Chef and what we could do than here's why any of this matters at all, which was really heartening, and especially just to see how much of the talk, I unfortunately didn't get to really see very many talks because I was standing in the booth all day having the same conversation with 800 people, which was great because it was a great conversation to have. But talking to people about the talks they went to, these were topics I would not expect to have seen at a Microsoft event a few years ago. And it's people have tweeted and made these comments that we are definitely living in an alternate timeline right now. So somewhere there's an alternate universe where it really sucks to work with Microsoft stuff. Fortunately, we're not living in that alternate timeline right at this point. We're in the good one, or maybe it's the evil one. I don't know. With the goatee. That was random. So that being said, any kind of final thoughts before we go into checkouts, folks?
Just on that topic of how we can improve, I'm still interested in hearing what Chris and Evo think that we are going to use. Just a line or two. How are you working on iterating to get even better at this, doing the DevOps as opposed to doing the BOFH thing?
From my point of view, it's I've kind of dropped off the speaking, writing scene for the last couple of years, primarily because moving continents with a family is hard. But one of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is much of what we see in the DevOps world. The implication underneath is you need to be using a PaaS of some sort. You need to be somewhere in the webby space. I don't deal with any PaaS. I don't have any TCP connections facing the intertubes. My stuff is all purely internal. And for a lot of enterprises, especially when I was a consultant, these guys are really suffering out there. So kind of, for me, the next thing is to take what I've learned, in my consulting days in the webby world, and the 5 years I've spent having my own hardware, and kind of distilling those principles and kind of figuring out ways that we can roll it out to the hurting masses out there who really need some help and love. And as much as I hate the term enterprise DevOps, there is much we can do to help people in enterprises learn the lessons and love of DevOps.
And I think that might, I don't know, Evo, if you're about to jump in, go ahead.
Okay. So I would actually also target the other spectrum of that is the lone sysadmin, the one that works in a small or medium business and they're one sysadmin supporting 50 to 200 to 300 users. We need to start embracing them as well. Like that individual is not a happy camper. They clearly still think, and they're working under like a pressure where they believe that it's just them versus the world. And I feel like things like DevOps and actually having he or she know what DevOps is all about may actually make their lives a lot easier. And a great way of seeing sort of like a temperature reading of that is, and Matt, you and I joke about this actually, is like our sysadmin on Reddit. Like half that crowd is a lone sysadmin, and
they're so unhappy.
And they're so unhappy. And like if you think about like if we can make their lives easier, they're going to eventually go into an enterprise shop, or they may go for a startup, but they're going to come in with these preconceived notions that being alone and supporting developers or supporting another organization is not a bad thing. And right now they do. Right now they really don't like life. And so I feel like that's one area we can really improve on.
I agree, and I think you would said basically the same thing that I would think about in the role that someone like you or I being on the vendor side and how I look at what I do. Again, I mean, sure, it's great to get paid and everything, but I really do feel like we do what we do because maybe not everyone who we sell Chef to or that we help out or do things with is it really going to make a difference, but when it does, it's pretty fucking awesome, to know that you're doing some work that, because we've had this pain, right? And you're not going to get everybody there, and Jez has said before about that, he's going to be preaching this for the rest of his career, and the good news is he's always going to have a job. The bad news is there's so many people that don't want to hear it, but you still get through. And that's what I'm hoping, and I hope that happens. I've given up on our sysadmin. It's a place where people just want to fight. They just want to be bitchy, and they just want to complain, and they just want to vent, and maybe that's okay, and maybe that's what that needs to be. And it doesn't accomplish anything by getting into a fight there. So let them, that's the empathy to that. But there's other mechanisms that we have to help show, and I think like this episode, I think could be great because it says, hey, look, we've all been there. This is 5 people that this was who've been in our career for a fair amount of time, and we all felt the way that you feel now, and we got there. So, and once you know something can be done, it's a lot easier to do it. So hopefully this helps reach some people.
And here's, my solemn promise: if you're less BOFHy, I guarantee you'll be happier.
That's a guarantee, or your money back. We will happily refund you the money spent on the offer not eligible for our sponsors. So that said, let's we need to wrap up here. So let's go into, we've just got a couple some community and event stuff coming up. Happy to announce. Well, actually, Bridget could say it. It's your conference. It's your thing.
Sure. Okay. There is a lot of DevOps days coming up. You should go to devopsdays.org and check them all out. If you would like to come to DevOps Days Minneapolis, it's July 8th and 9th. And unbeknownst to me, Matt went and signed Arrested DevOps up as a media sponsor for the conference I'm putting on.
I would like to point out it's not completely unbeknownst to you, but to be fair, when I mentioned it to you, it was when we were in a bar and you were cranky about something, and I said, "Hey, ADO should be a media sponsor," and you said, "Talk to Duffield. He does the sponsors."
I really don't remember this conversation.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, it was.
I was there. It was.
Yeah.
This is
so I
not
have
familiar.
Yes.
But in any case, ADO listeners can get a 10% discount on a DevOps Days Minneapolis ticket, which is still on its early bird pricing until the end of May. So we can get 10% off with the code ADO10. And you should also check out DevOps Days Toronto is coming up next week.
I don't think unless you're listening live.
Unless you're listening live, that'll be over.
You probably missed it.
It's this week, and I'm actually going there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
it's like the end of this week.
I'll be there. I'll be there this week. Yeah.
Yep. I've completely lost track of what day it is because #OpsLife.
It's the 11th. It must be Toronto.
Okay,
so.
And DC in June, Pittsburgh in August.
The very first DC, right?
Very first DevOps Days DC at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office of all places.
Mm.
Should be.
Is this getting to be the new thing now, where you have to do DevOps Days in somewhere, everyone has to raise the bar? Like Rockies was in a data center. They're going to do that in the patent office. Although I'd like to say, Chicago, we did ours in the Sears Tower. But then you discover that those weird spaces are not really actually that good, and you go back to something normal.
You did it in the Sears Tower, which was really cool, but I did not know it was possible to be too high for LTE to work.
Yep, that's why we are not. Talk to Chris. Chris was our network guy. Chris was saying exactly why we're not doing it there again. But
for hours on the network problems there.
Yeah,
that was pretty wacky. DevOps Days Chicago. Matt can tell you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, actually, so that'll be August 25th and 26th. It's at the Gleacher Center. and in Chicago, Illinois. The end of August should be actually pretty nice. Registration is available. I think we still have some early bird tickets available. So if you go to DevOpsDays.org or DevOpsDaysShy.org, you can register. And we also just opened our CFPs, which I think are open until the end of June. So if you go to cfp.devopsdaysshy.org, go ahead and you can submit an Ignite or a talk. We'd love to see what you have. Over the next, of the upcoming fortnight, as Bridget likes to say, I will be in Seattle a lot over the next couple weeks, and I'm speaking at the ALM Forum on, so next Wednesday on the 20th, along with quite the illustrious group of DevOps Illuminati, including, Dominica DeGrandis and J. Paul Reed and Mike McGarr and even the Cheslock himself. So,
Wow. The
DevOps
Serati.
It is, plus a whole host of others. So if you're going to be there, come say hi.
Cool. I'm going to be at Velocity Santa Clara, and I am apparently giving an Ignite there. I'll tell you what the Ignite's called. I haven't even tweeted about this yet.
Ooh,
it's called, though I probably will have by the time this gets published, but it's called From Kirk/Spock to AWS/ELB. And it's all about how being a giant fandom dork has actually been a great help in working in operations.
All right.
So, and yeah, let's see, where's everyone else going to be?
Well, I'll be at DevOps Days Toronto, so come see me there. Yeah. And then I'll also probably be at Velocity. So, and Santa Clara is awesome this time of year.
I like Velocity Santa Clara. And I know, other places, other people are like, oh, I like going to conferences in cities with more fun, and there's nothing in Santa Clara. And I'm like, no, it's great. It's like a high school lock-in or sleepaway camp with all your DevOps buddies.
You're totally right.
There's nothing else to do, so everyone hangs out at that hotel bar or in the hot tub after hours Etsy office hours in the hot tub. It's
I mean, who doesn't love paying $18 for a beer, right?
You're doing it wrong if you're buying the beers.
I'd like to recommend.
Other side of the vendor table, Bridget. Other side of the vendor table.
I'm the vendor.
Right.
So.
If I can, a quick plug for biking. Whatever city you're in, there's a bike share program. Get a group of people, hop out on a bike. It's a lot of fun.
Awesome, yeah.
It's actually Seattle Bike to Work Week this month, so
cool.
If you're in Seattle, grab that
I will
bike
be in
and go.
Seattle this week. I am not biking to work because I think I'm going to an office that's in Redmond and I'm staying in Pioneer Square.
There's actually an amazing bike trail that goes across.
I'm sure there is. I'm also getting off a plane at 1 a.m. on Wednesday and going to the customer at 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, so I will not be doing any biking.
By bicycle.
Yeah, bye. So let's do our checkouts. Chris, what do you have for our listeners to check out?
Yeah, keeping with the topic that we got today, there's an awesome talk about The Evil Hat by Liz Keogh. I've got a link to a recording of, I think it was QCon London, where I saw her give this one, but it's fantastic. She gets some fantastic examples of various different ways perverse incentives have bitten people. But yeah, also just keep an eye out for when the QCon Chicago talks make it out onto the internet, because there's some really, really good ones. The closing keynote today was from one of the JPL NASA group, who she was actually in charge of working on the parachutes from the Mars landers with the whole sky crane system there, which was a very educational talk. I really enjoyed that.
Great. And Kevin?
So, non-tech related, it is somewhat tech related. The new Trek mountain bike that's out is the new Stash. It is a 29er plus. It is super sweet. Basically, the cool thing about this bike, so I ride a very large bike, and on top of, I'm 6'4". With a 29er, you have larger wheels. Typically, those bikes are up a lot higher, and with a larger wheelbase, they're a little bit a little bit harder to guide down a downhill path. So they've solved that problem by basically raising the rear chainstay above the drivetrain. Allows when you pull up the bike, you can view it on trekbikes.com. Again, it's the new stash. You can see how much lower the bottom bracket is by allowing the drivetrain to be below the chainstay. So
I am looking at it right now. I love that the tires are called Chupacabra.
Yeah, it's a super hot bike. Just came out this month. We're all very excited about it, and I'm hoping that they still have one of my size.
I need to buy a new bike, so I think, Kevin, I'm going to be hitting
you have
you
a
up for some
friend.
suggestions.
Yes, absolutely. Glad to. Anytime.
Evo, do you have any checkouts? I know we kind of hit you at the last minute, so do it live.
No, not right now. I don't, because I had no idea that was coming.
It's okay. I'll give my checkouts, and then if Evo wants to tell us about something cool he's read or bought or thought about or tried lately, that would be great. You know, new favorite whiskey or whatever.
Evo drinks IPAs.
What?
And martinis.
IPAs are delicious.
I do drink IPAs.
Hey, at the DevOps Days Minneapolis organizer meeting tonight, I had some delicious Lift Bridge. It's a very hoppy IPA from Stillwater. Or not is it Stillwater? Yeah, it's from Stillwater. Okay, so I have two checkouts. One is we're about to that. If you live in Zone 4B like I do, we're about to the time of year where you start thinking that maybe you could start planting some things, but maybe not because it's overnight lows in the 30s right now. But if you're into gardening at all, which I am, seedsavers.org, organic heirloom seeds, is super worth checking out. You can get really interesting seeds for, types of carrots that you've never seen before. And things like that. So
my son wanted to plant cantaloupes this weekend.
Ooh.
He found cantaloupe seeds at Walmart. He's like, "Can we plant these?" I'm like, "I've never grown a cantaloupe."
Can you grow cantaloupe in Chicago?
I don't know. We're sticking with carrots and cucumbers and tomatoes.
Oh, I'll have to see. But anyway, so if you haven't, sated all your seed desires, it's worth checking Seed Savers out. And then also, because it was a really interesting PDF that came up in a discussion that Allspot actually linked to, because as BROps likes to say, as Catherine Daniels likes to say, he mostly communicates by sending PDFs to people, whether in email or other. But he linked to this interesting paper by David Woods and a couple of other people from 2004, I think it was, called Common Ground and Coordination in Joint Activity, which doesn't sound as exciting as it actually is, because it's basically all about communication, collaboration, cooperation, all of this inter-team stuff that we were talking about today on the Hangout. So
that's awesome.
And full disclosure, I have not read the whole thing yet. I've read like 17 pages in. It's very long.
There's lots of reading.
It's hard to make it all the way through really long PDFs, but it's really interesting so far.
Great.
There might be a twist ending. I don't know.
So my first checkout, which I have to admit I haven't read yet because I just got it today, but we want to share it, is that the early release, unedited, whatever version of the book, the O'Reilly book, Effective DevOps by Catherine Daniels and Jennifer Davis, has been released. And most amusingly, O'Reilly chose to have the animal on the cover of it be a yak, which was pretty awesome. So go ahead, you can go pick that up and put it on your Kindle or your ebook thingy or whatever. And then another one is, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this. I think it's Askinema. It's basically ASCII Cinema, and it's a tool for recording terminal sessions for playback later, like for a video of them. So like if you're showing a demo or doing a bunch of commands on a terminal. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes, or it's asciinema.org to check out.
That's really
cool.
That's interesting. But okay, so we can't let Evo get away with not telling us anything whatsoever that's cool or awesome. So here's a gimme. Here's a softball. What is, in your estimation, the most delicious IPA?
Hop Venom by Boneyard. It is the best IPA ever.
Why?
It's a perfect balance of flavor, so it's not like overly, even though it's called Hop Venom, it's actually not overly hoppy, and hides the fact that it's a 9%-ish IPA, double IPA, by actually like being nice, and it goes down nice. And yeah, I don't know, like they actually have the Notorious, which is a triple IPA. While it's really good, it is actually, you can actually taste the alcohol, versus Hop Venom where you don't. So
I'd like to point out that Evo on Untapped has tried 558 different kinds of beers. So when he tells you that's good, you should.
yeah.
We'll have a
Honestly,
link to that. We'll have a link to that in the show
Bravo.
notes.
Just
So my
Untapped.
local bar in Seattle, it's called Chuck's Hop Shop. They actually have it on tap every Monday, and they save a keg to do it on Mondays. And at this point, I actually go there and call it Hop Venom Mondays because it's just that good.
Boneyard Beer Company, you heard it here. All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. So wrapping up here, we have a newsletter. You can subscribe to it by going to arresteddevops.com/bananastand. It is the best way to know about our upcoming podcast episodes and cool news with DevOps. We also have an iPhone app if you like iPhone apps and don't have another kind of podcatcher. But hey, you can download it for free at arresteddevops.com/iPhone. Like to thanks to our sponsors. Make sure you visit them at arresteddevops.com/pagerduty and arresteddevops.com/loggly, which is LOGGLY. Thanks to Chris, Kevin, and Evo for joining us. And to our loyal listeners, or disloyal listeners, depending on the case. If you enjoy Arrested DevOps or don't, either way, we'd appreciate it if you visit arresteddevops.com/iTunes and leave us a review in the iTunes store. We'd love to know what you thought of this episode, and you can leave us comments at arresteddevops.com/36.
Be sure to check us out at arresteddevops.com or at arresteddevops on Twitter. We're always happy to get your input, ideas, or feedback at shows@arresteddevops.com. Please let us know any ideas you have for future episodes. I'm Bridget at Bridget Krumhout.
I'm Matt at Matt Stratton.
We're Arrested DevOps, and remember,
There's always DevOps
in the banana stand.